Welcome to another special episode of Fourth and Frames. I'm Chris Battistel with my co-host Drew Scott and Rhett Manuel. Tonight, we welcome very special guest Joe Dolan from fantasypoints.com, and we start our divisional previews with some musts, busts, and maybes from the NFC East and give you some of our few early redraft targets before you head into your drafts. Let's get it popping. Before we hop into the show, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell to get notified whenever the Fantasy and Frames team drops new content. Follow us across all social media platforms at Fantasy and Frames. Rate and review the podcast, and visit www.fantasyandframes.com, where you will find all of our rankings, articles, profile videos, show pages, everything you need to succeed this upcoming fantasy season is on www.fantasyandframes.com. Now, joining us tonight, we have a very special guest, co-founder of fantasypoints.com, the number one cumulative ranker from 2014 to 2018, multiple award-winning host and producer, Penn State graduate, ordained minister, and someone who has worked with the Philadelphia Eagles, Mr. Joseph Dolan.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Yes, ordained minister is I guess it's true. The letter of the law is true. The spirit probably not. But I have done 2 weddings, so 3 at this point. Well, one vow renewal, but yeah, it's a fun thing. Just the Universal Life Church in beautiful Modesto, California, ordained me. So no, it's guys, it's good to be with you. Thank you for having me on the podcast tonight.
Yeah, definitely, man, definitely. I gotta ask from the top. Seeing that you're from Penn State, I'm a big college fantasy football guy. Do you follow the program at all still?
Oh, yeah, I do. I am a season ticket holder to Clemson, but I definitely follow the Penn State program. This is probably, I kind of keep it at arm's length. I'm not like a rabid type of guy, but like this is probably the highest expectations I've had and we won the Rose Bowl last year. And it's probably the highest expectations I've had in quite some time. I mean, the backfield is outrageous. The secondary is outrageous. It's all down to Drew Alar, but I'm excited for him too.
Yeah, I'm expecting him to come in and have a big season in that system. Mm-hmm. Nick Singleton, Katrin Allen there in that backfield, like you mentioned, should be college fantasy studs for anyone that plays any kind of college fantasy football.
And I hope they get their NIL money, by the way.
Yeah,
because of what happens to our last star running back. So yeah,
he came out today and said that he's gonna play, but it's a murky situation with the running backs right now. Running backs across the board really are kind of upset. Maybe there's gonna be like a SAG walkout. Maybe we get a running back walkout. We get a running back strike. Who knows what's gonna happen come September? Also, what's it like living with retired athletes with butterscotch and crimpet?
Oh man, you dug deep. Yeah, my butterscotch is still very much she broke her leg in racing, and that's what forced her to retire. She still very much has the mentality of a racer. Crimpet, and these are my 2 greyhounds, by the way. Yeah. Crimpet was never much of an athlete. She never had the makings of a varsity athlete. She won like 1 or 2 races, but she is much more I call her my sous chef. She hangs out with me when I'm cooking and looks for all the scraps, which is great because when I spill something when I'm cooking, I don't have to clean up after myself because she does it for me. So I would recommend getting some retired racing greyhounds for that. But they have 2 very distinct personalities. So I love my girls.
Yeah, I love it. And also at fantasypoints.com, you guys just dropped the Fantasy Points data suite. I haven't really dove into it too much. I have been on it to take a look through what you guys got. It looks like an excellent tool. Do you want to give some insight into that?
How much time do you have? So it's what we wanted to do was create, like, we have used other sites, and like a lot of the very expensive football charting sites, which provide an extremely valuable service. But the one thing that we found was, number one, we couldn't display the stats on our site for legal reasons, other reasons like that. Number two, it wasn't the easiest to use for fantasy purposes. So we wanted to marry the two and build a really powerful, useful, consumer forward product. And we understand, it's not going to be for everyone. That, like, I would still venture to guess 90% of our subscribers to the website are going to be guys who are listening or subscribing to the website to download a cheat sheet, take it to their drafts, and never log into the website again. I understand that there is that market in fantasy football. But for those of you who play DFS, who play Dynasty, who just like to sit around after a long day and say, hey, I wonder who leads the NFL in air yards in home games when the winds are above miles an hour, which you can find on Fantasy Points data. Yeah, that's what that's for. So I hope everybody enjoys it. We have it for a very special price right now. It's just $50 for the entire season. And there's an open period right now. You don't even need to sign in to look at it. And then there's going to be 7-day trials. You sign up, you get a 7-day trial to it. So we really want people to understand what the tool is before they decide if it's for them. So I'm really excited about that. Right now, obviously, we only have all of our data is hand charted by our guys. So we only have 2 seasons of it. So like that tells you, like, we're doing this the right way. We're going to update it every week in season, early in the week, just like you might expect. And then in seasons forward, we'll back chart, add some new features. We have plenty planned for the data suite.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm looking forward to really diving in to that tool and using it to my advantage to help me win all the fantasy leagues that I'm in, as well as helping other people win their championships, win their leagues. Now, Bob Harris mentioned it in the chat. He is the trendsetter on this show. We are currently 3-3, so we need you to break the deadlock. One of the bits we have going on here on Fourth and Frames is we ask our guests to maybe sing a little bar, or maybe if you want to rap or do something like that. So any chance we could get Joe Dolan to sing us a little clip here?
Oh, okay. Of what? Anything?
Anything of your choosing.
Okay. So I have there's a couple. I'll let you guys choose. I have a couple of karaoke songs that are my go-tos. I have California Love. I do Tupac's verse as long as I have somebody to do Dre's. I do Brandy, You're a Fine Girl by Looking Glass, and Semi-Charmed Life by Third Eye Blind. So you guys pick and I'll sing a few lines.
Some good ones there.
My vote is Tupac 100%.
Okay.
That's my guy, but I mean
all right, you guys have to vote too.
Yeah, we'll do some Tupac. We'll do some Tupac.
Boy,
big in the news today.
I have to. Oh yeah, that's right. They like. I wonder if they found him. Like
yeah, him or something to do with that case.
Okay, then. Out on bail, fresh out of jail, California dreaming. Soon as I step on the scene, I'm hearing hoochie screaming, fiending for money and alcohol. The life of the West Side player where cowards died, and it's all ball. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
For the rest,
we'll take it. Thank you very much.
I can't. It does not sound good a cappella.
No, we'll take it. Sounded great.
Okay. Anyway, that's enough. Bob Harris voted for Brandy. By the way. All right, Bob, I'll give it to you. There's a port on the Western Bay, and it serves 100 ships a day. There we go. That's enough. That's all you're getting, Bob.
It's like a mix between Fergie and Jesus.
We appreciate you. We appreciate it. Thank you to everyone in the chat, everyone watching. If you're watching this on Twitter, head over to YouTube. We cannot see your comments on Twitter, so head over to YouTube and let Joe know how much you enjoyed his Tupac verse and a little bit of his Brandy sing. Well, we appreciate you. Let's get into the show. We got our NFC East preview, probably one of the more stout divisions in the NFL with the Dallas Cowboys, Super Bowl contender last season, the Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Commanders, who seemed to great defense there for Washington, and then the New York Giants, who kind of playoff team last season. Good chance that maybe all four teams are fighting for playoff spots in the 2023 season. But we're going to fire it off with the Dallas Cowboys. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go around the frame. We're going to give you a must, a bust, and a maybe from each squad. So, Joe, do you want to lead off with the Dallas Cowboy must draft for the 2023 fantasy season?
Yeah, let's go with somebody who's in the news, and that's Tony Pollard. Now, the difference between Tony Pollard and Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs is Tony Pollard has signed his franchise tender. So Tony Pollard is certainly not at a threat to hold out. I don't think either of the other two guys, and we'll talk about Saquon, is at much of a threat to hold out, but it has to be acknowledged. But here's the thing with Tony Pollard. I think Tony Pollard, this is one of the things that our data suite at fantasypoints.com has is expected fantasy points, which Scott Barrett developed using the quality of carries. Where was the carry? The quality of targets. Where did the target occur? From what yard line? What is the percentage that somebody's going to score from there? And last year, Pollard was 25th in expected fantasy points per game, but 9th in fantasy points per game. Ezekiel Elliott played on a higher percentage of snaps and saw better volume. Ezekiel Elliott actually had more expected fantasy points per game than Tony Pollard, but Pollard outscored Elliott by 3.2 fantasy points per game. Now, here's the reason Ezekiel Elliott had higher expected fantasy points per game, because Ezekiel Elliott was the goal line back last year. Mm-hmm. If Tony Pollard gets and usurps just 50% of Ezekiel Elliott's now vacated expected fantasy points, he'd average 18.3 expected fantasy points. That would have been fourth best last year. Among 27 running backs last year with 800 or more rushing yards, only Aaron Jones and David Montgomery had a lower percentage of his team's carries inside the 5-yard line. That is almost certain for Tony Pollard to rise significantly, barring them re-signing Ezekiel Elliott, which I think could still happen. Tony Pollard is a second-round pick who has number one overall running back upside. That is my must for the Dallas Cowboys.
Yep. I love it. I love Tony Pollard coming into the season, especially with Ezekiel Elliott most likely gone in that backfield. The secondary running back there is Malik Davis for the Dallas Cowboys, but Tony Pollard is going to be that do-it-all back for the Cowboys in the 2023 season. So definitely, like you said, must draft now. Are you taking Tony Pollard as a back end first in a single QB redraft league? Is that about where you got him, or do you?
Oh, well, the thing is, I've been so drunk on underdog drafts right now. You can get him at the end of the second round. And I mean, you can literally pair Tony Pollard with Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp, which is really awesome. And that's a really easy way to go hero running back right now. Mm-hmm. I think that's the way a lot of people like to build their teams in general now, but especially on underdog, which is so drunk on wide receivers. Tony Pollard is a hero RB superstar right now. Like, you can go Pollard, get a couple of Justin Jefferson. You can come back around with the T. Higgins or Devontae Smith, and then get Mark Andrews in the 4th round. And then maybe you can stack Lamar Jackson there with Mark Andrews in the 5th round. So that's a really appealing start for me, and Tony Pollard lets that happen.
Yep. I love it. Rhett, give us the Dallas Cowboys bust for the 2023 fantasy football season.
Well, Chris, I'm just going to go ahead and say this because I don't think anybody else is willing to say it, but we might have to call time of death on Michael Gallup. Mm-hmm. And here's why. Because if we're going to look at it in essence, there's been injuries. There's increased target competition with Brandon Cooks coming in this year more than ever. And he is what he is. I'm sorry, Jorge. I know you sign our paychecks. I know you love him. But like I said, Michael Gallup at this point is, for lack of a better way of putting it, a guy with 1,000-yard season and 19 career touchdowns in 6 years. So where he's going right now, I mean, Dallas has shown, if you want to put it, a lack of faith in acquiring Brandon Cooks, who has been hit or miss with injuries himself throughout his career. And currently, when you look at a Michael Gallup in ADPs, he is currently only going around the 14th round. So if you want to take a flyer on him, you can't really blame anybody for doing that. But my question I want to ask people is, Do we think there are better dart throws at that point in the draft? I would argue probably so. There's not a ton of great matchups for Michael Gallup as well either. If you look at their schedule this year, there are a lot of poor matchups where, frankly, they are not friendly to him. And you also have CeeDee Lamb, who's going to soak up a lot of that target competition. Like we said, Tony Pollard is going to have a big season. We're all expecting it too. If Michael Gallup slides, which he may very well, sure. But at the end of the day, you're looking at a guy who last year in 14 games only had 74 targets and 39 receptions for 424 yards and 4 touchdowns, and finished as the wide receiver 65 in fantasy points per game. I don't know about you, but for a guy who for so long we've kind of hyped up as one of these sleeper guys, that doesn't exactly scream we need to go out and get that guy. And like we said, with CD being who he is, with Pollard emerging to likely be this guy who, like Joe said, has that fantasy running back one upside for the season. I mean, if it's up to me, if he slides, sure. Otherwise, anything 14th round or above, I hate it. I'm out on Michael Gallup. I just don't see it happening for him this season.
It's going to be interesting to see what the Dallas Cowboys do with that passing attack with Kellen Moore moving over to the Chargers. Mike McCarthy came out and said that Kellen Moore likes to score too many points. So I don't know. I don't know what the aspect is going to be there with the Dallas Cowboys and their passing attack. So we gave you the must. Joe gave you the must. Tony Pollard. Rhett gave you the bust with Michael Gallup. Drew, give us the maybe in this Dallas Cowboys offense.
Yeah, Rhett brought him up a few times there in his discussion with Gallup, and for me, it's Brandon Cooks. He's right now he's the wide receiver 43 according to Fantasy Pros PPR Redraft ADP. I've got him a few spots higher than that, and to me, a lot of it comes down to the fact that we know Dak loves to throw to the tight end, and Dalton Schultz, who was Dak's second favorite target last year, is out the door. And from a wide receiver standpoint, nobody in that wide receiver room outside of CD really separated themselves last year between Gallup and Noah Brown and the other guys that got opportunities to be the number 2 receiver in that offense. So I think it's pretty clear that Brandon Cooks is the second best option for Dak next season. So I know you mentioned we've heard the rumbles of Mike McCarthy slowing the team down, not passing as much. They want to, slow it down, stop scoring all those points. But with Cook, something that is appealing to me is that with him being able to stretch the field, even if they do slow it down a little bit, he really only needs 1 or 2 big plays, and he can cash in for you, especially for the value that you're getting him at. So I think at the price point that he's at, I know he switched teams a lot, but he's put up 1,000-yard seasons with like 4 different teams now. So that's something that doesn't really scare me off with him like it might some other veteran receivers. So at the price he's going at wide receiver 43, I like taking that gamble at that point.
I'm going to give you guys a trivia question, by the way. He mentioned Brandon Cooks has a 1,000-yard season with 4 teams. He's one of only 2 receivers to do that. Do you know who the other one is? And Cooks would be the first one to have a 5th team, by the way. I love trivia, so this is a good one.
Brandon Marshall.
It is Brandon Marshall. Yeah.
Oh, good.
I think T.O. comes to mind because he had good years with both Buffalo and Cincinnati, but he didn't reach 1,000 yards with either of those teams. Obviously, Randy Moss did it with 3 teams. But Brandon Marshall's the guy, but Brandon Cooks would be the first with a 5th team.
Yeah, hopefully. Do you own a lot of Brandon Cooks, Joe, in your underdog drafts?
Only on Dak teams.
Okay.
I'm just not a guy who I'm against. It's just not so there you go. He's a maybe. He's not a guy I'm against. I am completely against Gallup, by the way. Gallup by our data at Fantasy Points, his minus 2.7 yards per target over expectation. So he was actually under expectation, was worst among wide receivers with 50 or more targets. There were 81 wide receivers. So he was the least efficient wide receiver in all of football last year. That's why they went out and got Brandon Cooks. So yeah, Cooks is definitely a maybe guy for me. Definitely maybe Oasis. I can sing some of that too. I think that was a completely reasonable move by Dallas to make. Unfortunately, they forced their own hand by trading Amari Cooper last year.
Yeah, that they did.
Yeah, that was not so reasonable in my opinion, especially given that what they got back for.
Well, and like
a whole other discussion.
They jumped we could talk about that for as long, but they jumped the gun way before because the wide receiver market blew up last year. They could have gotten way more for him later in the year.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely. Yep. All right, we're going to move to the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that Joe has covered in his time covering football. Rhett, give us the must draft candidate for the last year's Super Bowl runner-up.
Anybody who knows me is not going to be shocked by the fact that I'm just huge on AJ Brown. I mean, what can't you say about the guy? You know, he's a phenomenal athlete. First of all, he looks the part, 6 foot, 226 pounds, runs this 4.5, does it all. Currently my wide receiver 3, whether it's redraft, PPR, dynasty, doesn't matter. You dangle him in front of me, I'm taking the shot on AJ Brown. And here's why, because if we're looking at just what the projections are, you know, everybody has these projections out, Fantasy Pros, Number Fire, whoever it is, across the board, the man is teed up for a monster year. And if you look at last year and what he did in his first year in an offense that, let's be honest, wasn't exactly chucking it around left, right, and everywhere, the man had 146 targets. He had 88 catches. He had 1,496 yards and 11 touchdowns in a run-first offense with Devontae Smith taking targets out of his hand, with guys who can catch the ball like Kenny Gainwell, Miles Sanders, whoever you want to call it. Everyone on that offense had the ability to catch the ball. Did they all get targets? No, but were they all options? Absolutely. So looking at this year with Number Fire, who J.J. Zachary Easton and their family do a great job, his projections this year, according to Number Fire, are 148.85 targets, 92.64 catches, 1,383.26 yards, and practically 10 touchdowns. So I know we love the Jamar Chases, the Justin Jeffersons, the Cooper Kupps, all these guys. Just in terms of sheer volume, though, you are going to have a hard time pushing me off of the AJ Brown ledge and saying that this guy is equal to these other guys, because frankly, in my mind, he is the focal point of that pass offense. That target tree is pretty consolidated between him and Devonta Smith. So if you're looking for a guy who is absolutely going to slam dunk and you don't want to take the easy way and go Jalen Hurts, you have to go the easy way, the 1B, and go AJ Brown. I mean, it's just too easy in my mind.
Yep. Definitely a must draft in that offense. Now you're on the clock, Rhett. We talked about the Dallas Cowboys previous to the Philadelphia Eagles. Are you going AJ Brown or CeeDee Lamb?
It's AJ for me. I mean, AJ. It's just, I'm always, I don't know, maybe it's because I have skin in the game with that guy. Maybe I'm just showing my personal bias, but I just see a guy who is going to be locked in for 150 targets, a guy who has done it for a longer period of time, a guy who frankly did it in Tennessee where they were never really chucking it out left and right. He's done it in run-first offenses throughout his career. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to not look at that guy and say, okay, if they decide to start throwing it even more, you don't know what the ceiling is going to be for him. So for me, it's still AJ.
Yep. I dig it, man. All right, Joe, give us the bust candidate for the Philadelphia Eagles.
So this is actually, we have to speak about bust for the Philadelphia Eagles. We have to speak about that on a curve the way than you do from other teams, right? Yeah. Because the way I talk about the Eagles, they're very much like the Minnesota Vikings in one regard. And there's other teams like this in the NFL as well. They're an extremely narrow fantasy team. You know, last year, Arthur Smith with the Falcons made a comment when people were asking him, why does Kyle Pitts have like 2 catches for 20 yards every game? Arthur Smith was like, we're not playing fantasy football. We're trying to win games, you know? And then I look at a team like the Philadelphia Eagles, which, by the way, won a lot of games and went to the Super Bowl. All they do is put the ball in the hands of their good players. It was them, Miami, Minnesota. These teams put the ball in their hands and they're good players. And lo and behold, God damn, they score a lot of points when they do that. So bust is relative for the Eagles. And so what I'm going to say is DeAndre Swift. I am not against DeAndre Swift at all. If you were to, like, if I were to come onto this podcast and tell you, hey guys, I'm Joe from the future. Hi, future Joe. What can you tell us? I said, well, January is a lot like July of 2023, but DeAndre Swift had the best season of his career. Would you be shocked by that?
No.
Right. But all I'm saying here is that relative to cost for somebody we're about to talk about, I prefer the other guy at cost. Doesn't mean I'm against drafting him. Where I've drafted Swift has been on Jalen Hurts teams. And, I think that's kind of interesting because, maybe he's the running back who catches some receiving touchdowns. Miles Sanders ended up having a bunch of rushing touchdowns last year. So I do think DeAndre Swift could blow up this year, but the injury history, the fact that he consistently lost a goal line role in Detroit, we know who the goal line back is in Philadelphia. That's Jalen Hurts. So I think DeAndre Swift is probably the most likely Eagle to bust.
Yep. I think I agree with that. The Philadelphia backfield hasn't been something that's been reliable fantasy-wise outside, like you said, Jalen Hurts, who is the goal line back, especially when they're close and they can do that sneak that every other team just hates. That Dallas Goedert interview where he was on that podcast was just quote-worthy stuff. It was funny, the stuff he was giving out, and the other teams just complaining at him on the field, calling him names, saying, we just can't stop it. But we talked about DeAndre Swift as the bust. We got AJ Brown as the must. Drew, give us the maybe player for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, so I think this might have been the guy that Joel's referring to at value that he preferred, which is Rashad Penny, who right now is going off the board as running back 36. And so I know that there's plenty of questions about how many healthy games you might get out of Rashad Penny, but I don't think there's any way you can question his talent whenever he's out on the field at this point. I mean, last season he had 5.4 true yards per carry, which was first among running backs and was also first in yards after contact per attempt and was second in explosive run rate as well. He's not going to give you a ton in the passing game, but I'm okay with that in this offense. I mean, Hurts doesn't throw to the running back that often anyway, and that's not really the role at the running back position that you want to target in this offense in the first place. The role you want is that early down role that Miles Sanders played last year that led him to a top 15 finish. Now, obviously playing all 17 games helped Sanders' case in that fact, but if Penny can do that as well behind this same elite run blocking offensive line, I think his ceiling is even higher because I think he's a better runner than Sanders or any other running back currently on the Eagles roster right now for that matter. So I get that the injury risk is obvious at this point, but at his ADP, I'm willing to take the shot for that dream healthy season on this offense behind this offensive line.
I got a stat for you, Drew.
Let's hear it.
So, last year, Rashad Penny was first in the NFL among qualified running backs in yards after contact per attempt. Miles Sanders was last in that category in each of the last 2 years.
That's wild.
So, now you can also interpret that different ways. Miles Sanders was getting contacted much farther down the field, or right. Of course, Rashad Penny's going to have yards after contact because he's getting contacted earlier. But I just think that goes to show, man, if he plays 10 games, he's going to be a difference maker for fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I couldn't agree more. I've been a Rashad Penny guy for quite some time, so it was like it was like the LeBron James, I can't believe this is my life type of moment whenever he signed with Philly, like getting to see him run behind that offensive line. I mean, very, very excited. I want him to stay healthy so bad.
Yeah. That's the biggest part of it.
Yeah, can I ask another question, though? Because we're talking about, we've heard Rashad Penny, we've heard DeAndre Swift, but there is a Nick Sirianni man crush toy, the third man in that backfield, the tiny guy, Kenny Gainwell, who had a very a much larger role during the playoffs last year. Where do y'all think he stands among these three? Does he hold value? Is he going to be phased out by these other two who seem to be bigger names and seem to have more, upside? I don't know. What do y'all think?
I think if they can get reasonable blocking from either Penny or Swift, and I don't think it's going to be Swift because the Lions didn't trust him there, I think he'll be phased out. Part of the problem with Gainwell is he's reliable, but he's reliable in the Leroy Horde way, where Leroy Horde was a big grinder, but Kenny Gainwell, for a small guy, he had 0 explosive runs last year. 0. And we define an explosive run as a run that goes 15 or more yards. So it's not like a charting thing. It's a factual thing. He had no runs that went for 15 or more yards. And for a guy who's Kenny Gainwell's size, he was reliable. He could block a little bit. But I think if they get good health from Swift and Penny, they'll probably phase him out a little bit. That being said, nobody's gotten good health from Swift and Penny. So Kenny Gainwell going in like the 50s on underdog, that's a decent pick because this offense is going to be good regardless of whether or not the running back's good.
Yep, yeah, I mean, it really comes down to the Eagles are just building their running back room the right way, where they have a ton of talented guys and basically no money accounting for it. So, like, regardless of who's back there, they're going to be productive. But yeah, I think that the other two guys have much more upside given their skill set. I just think that they're better players, and that's what I want to make the bet on.
Yeah, and lending into building their running back room the right way, just from a strictly football standpoint, their RB4 and Boston Scott would probably be a guy who would be, a little bit higher on most other teams' depth charts. I mean, not a bad player by any means there, too. So, Philadelphia, even if that injury bug hits, you're going to have a guy at the end of the day who's going to slide in and have some fantasy value. So, I mean, it's really one of these things, it's probably less documented than, Miami or Chicago in terms of a mysterious running back room, because we know who we expect to take the lead in Philadelphia's backfield. But there are a lot of names there. And, if something happens to one of them, you can just slide in another guy and you should probably be fine for at least a flex play. So good on Philly, man.
Yep, agreed. We got some breaking news come across the wire. Denzel Mims has been traded. Any guesses to what team he got traded to?
I
haven't seen this. I
know,
haven't seen
so
this.
I'm not going to get
the
out.
Detroit Lions. Denzel Mims.
Oh,
Detroit
really?
Lions.
Okay.
So, not anything spectacular, but if you're a dynasty player who's been stashing Denzel Mims on your bench, maybe a bit of an opportunity there with the Detroit Lions with Jameson Williams suspended for the first 6 and no real threat in the passing game outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown in that wide receiver room for the Detroit Lions. So maybe a second breath of life for Denzel Mims on the Detroit Lions. I'm not too sure what the package was, but just came across.
I'm going to guess it's going to be like one of those conditional 2025 7th round.
That's like a 7th round pick swap.
Yeah. And just for the record, I'd love to meet the man who is the last remaining person on Denzel Mims Island. Just whoever you are, if you're watching, I love you and I appreciate your commitment so much. Love it.
Yeah, dig it. So we talk Dallas Cowboys, we talk Philadelphia Eagles. Now we're going to talk one of the up-and-coming teams in the NFC East. New offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy from the Kansas City Chiefs joins that coaching staff with Ron Rivera. The Washington Commanders. Drew, you gave us 2 maybes already with the previous 2 teams. Give us your must draft for Washington.
Yeah, I think I've talked about Antonio Gibson enough on this show this year at this point. But, I mean, you gave me the must-draft player for the Commanders, so we're going to do it again. So he's currently the running back 31. I've got him at running back 26. And if I'm being honest with myself, that's probably the lowest I'm going to have him all season. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to fight off the urge to move him up. I love me some Antonio Gibson, man. Whenever he was drafted by Washington in 2020, after essentially being a wide receiver in college, the Commanders look at Gibson and was like, is this a 2-down running back? And turned him into an early down grinder for whatever reason. But the thing was, he was good, though. I mean, he had 2 top 13 finishes his first 2 years in the league. There's no more J.D. McKissick to block him from passing work. So hopefully he should have a chance to show off his true skill set in a better fashion this year. And we know Washington also brought in Eric Bieniemy as their new offensive coordinator from Kansas City this offseason. And he showed us last year what he could do with a guy with Gibson's skill set with Jerick McKinnon. Now, I don't expect Washington to have as many scoring opportunities as Kansas City did. Not hot take. I don't think that they're as good of an offense, but I do like that they have an OC now that has shown that he can make the most out of a player with Gibson's skill set. And I'm sorry, Jorge, but I also expect Washington to not be a very good team this year with plenty of game scripts that should lead to hopefully Gibson being on the field plenty for pass catching work as well. So, and just for me personally, I believe that Gibson's the better player. Now, at the end of the day, if the coaching staff doesn't believe that, that doesn't really matter. But I think he's the better player. I think he's in a great spot with an OC that should be able to make the most out of his skill set. So I cannot stop drafting Antonio Gibson right now.
I love it, especially with the situation around NFL running backs and them getting paid, Antonio Gibson's come out and says he wants to line up more as a wide receiver. So hopefully he can change his
Contract year too.
designation. Exactly.
So we got the contract year thing working for us too. I love running backs on a contract year.
Yeah. So hopefully he can change that designation to a wide receiver and get paid a little bit more money.
I hope so for his sake.
Yeah. But we're going to move to the bust of the Washington Commanders. Rhett, the guy you picked here kind of hurts my heart because I got a soft spot for this player. But give us your bust candidate for the Washington Commanders.
And look, it's not because I don't want him to succeed. I just don't see with the situation where he is going to succeed or for where we can even project that success. But we're going to talk about Sam Howell for a little bit because, yes, he had the one game last year where he flashed. We all know the rushing upside is there. You know, not the fastest guy, but, you know, kind of finds his way and makes his yards. But currently locked in as the quarterback 27 at Fantasy Pros. And per Fantasy Pros, he also has the hardest quarterback schedule this year amongst your quarterbacks. He's ranked 32nd in there. So if you're going to put a guy in a tough position for a first year starting, he looks to be in it. His projections are kind of all over the place. There are some places that have him around a 260-point quarterback, like Number Fire. Number Fire has him as a solid QB2. Fantasy Pros has him as a sub 200-point quarterback. So, you know, no one knows what to expect with this guy. And frankly, none of us really do too. If you look at his weekly projections, also on Number Fire, there are everywhere from like a sub 10-point week, like 5-6 points, up to being over a 20-point guy on a weekly basis. So, you know, they don't know where he is. We don't know where he is. We don't know what he's going to look like. We know they signed Jacoby Brissett to be his backup, a guy who has been a steady, at least serviceable starter in the league all these years. So if things go sideways, they can always flip it over to Jacoby Brissett. If you're going to compare Howell to another guy within their division, which frankly isn't the sexiest name either, Daniel Jones seems to have a little bit more consistency coming with him, but I'm going to talk about him a little bit later. So with the hard schedule, there's likely that short leash. I mean, I can't see it with Sam Howell. I'd love to see it because he seems like a good guy who's doing things the right way. But, you know, we don't award fantasy points for nice guys doing things the right way. So, I mean, we'll see where it goes.
I agree. Yeah, that schedule at the beginning, especially beginning of the year, is pretty stout. He's got the Broncos, the Bills, the Eagles, the Bears. He's got the Falcons, and then the Giants. And then with that Washington defense, I think it's going to allow him not to have to do too much as that quarterback. They're going to afford him the ability to just go out there and manage the game, use his feet. He can throw the ball downfield. We've seen that. So I'm expecting Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson to still have some pretty decent seasons there in Washington, but as a viable fantasy quarterback, it's gonna be tough for anyone to really rely on Sam Howell as the Washington Commanders quarterback. I'm pulling for him. Hello, Andrea. Thanks for joining the show. I'm pulling for Sam Howell. I was a big fan of him there in North Carolina, but I'm excited to see him get his opportunity in Washington. Now we had the must. Drew gave us the must for Washington with Antonio Gibson. Rhett gave us the bust with Sam Howell. Joe, give us the maybe player for this Washington Commanders offense.
So if you look at any efficiency chart on Twitter using fantasy points data, SIS, PFF, whatever stat program you want to use, Brian Robinson's going to be towards the bottom of those efficiency charts. And, you know, the one thing that I just keep coming back to, though, is the dude got shot in August.
Yeah.
Like, we have data that tells you how long it takes to come back from an ACL or a sports hernia or a neck injury, shoulder injury, all that. I don't think we got enough data on how long it takes a guy to come back from being shot before he's 100%, especially somebody who got shot, missed 4 games, and then was back. So in the second half of the year, Brian Robinson started to pick it up a little bit. He didn't get it a ton done in the passing game. But I tell you what, I was very happy to draft Brian Robinson and Scott Fishbowl. It's a league where you get points for carries. This guy's going to get carries. Ron Rivera likes to run the football. Eric Bieniemy is a former running back. Eric Bieniemy is going to run the football. Brian Robinson was a guy who I viewed coming out as a guy who profiled as a lead NFL running back. What does that mean? He's going to get 70 targets? No, it doesn't. But I think Brian Robinson is a guy who fits the profile here. And the one thing I keep coming back to, last year, nobody wanted to draft dead zone running backs. And so many dead zone running backs ended up winning leagues last year. Miles Sanders, Jamal Williams, David Montgomery, all these guys had good seasons. Brian Robinson seems like a guy who could be projected to lead his team in rushing 9th, 10th round, 10th round on some best ball drafts. That's clearly a maybe for me. If I feel like I've got a strong 1 and 2, man, I'll take a shot on a guy who might run for 1,000 yards. I think the coaching staff before his tragedy last year was angling for him to be the lead back from the get-go. You remember in training camp in the preseason, Ron Rivera had Antonio Gibson returning kickoffs. Yep. So they were out on him. And Gibson came out and he showed well in his opportunities, but I just wonder if Brian Robinson's going to be in better shape in 2023.
Yep, I agree. And like Tupac said, 5 shots couldn't stop me. I took it and smiled. But they also did draft Chris Rodriguez there from, I think it's Kentucky there, right? So he might have a decent role in that offense if one of these guys struggle or get injured. But I'm all in Brian Robinson. Like you said, Scott Fishbowl, I have him on my squad as well, just because of that carry total that he's going to see in that Washington backfield. So there you have it. We had the must, bust, and maybe from the Dallas Cowboys. The must, Tony Pollard. Bust, Michael Gallup. Maybe Brandon Cooks. The Philadelphia Eagles, our must is AJ Brown. Our bust is DeAndre Swift. And our maybe is Rashad Penny. From the Washington Commanders, our must is Antonio Gibson. Our bust is Sam Howell. And our maybe is Brian Robinson. And now we're going to get into the New York Giants, a team, playoff team last year, won a playoff game against Minnesota. If you watched the quarterback series, it's chronicled a little bit in that Netflix show there. But Joe, give us the must draft in this New York Giants offense.
I have 2 guys, and I really couldn't come to grips with which one, but both of them are free in drafts. One's not going to be free much longer. Eric Gray, the rookie running back. I think he's probably the best option behind Saquon Barkley. And again, I don't think Saquon is going to hold out. I think at this point, he understands that they've raised a significant enough stink about this that people are noticing and they're being like, yeah, this kind of does suck. Maybe they are able to get the NFL and the NFLPA to the table. I don't really know what the solution is going to be, but I don't think Saquon or Josh Jacobs is going to eat $10 million. I don't think that's going to happen after they saw what happened to Le'Veon Bell. But in the event that it does, Eric Gray, Saquon's had some injuries in the past. So I think Eric Gray, the rookie running back at Oklahoma, I think he's somebody you can turn to. And another guy who's free, and I just love drafting on best ball, is Darius Slayton. Who, I got to give Darius Slayton a lot of credit. This was a guy who was doghoused by multiple front offices and multiple coaching staffs. He was doghoused under the Dave Gettleman regime and the Joe Judge regime. He came in and it looked like he wasn't even going to have a role under Brian Dable. And then all of a sudden, the Giants need wide receivers. Darius Slayton comes out and does so well that he goes from a guy who they were thinking might have been cut in August to a guy who earned himself an extension, who got re-signed by the team. And again, look at the wide receivers on this team. Who's a better outside wide receiver on this team than Darius Slayton? Like the wide receiver market was so bad this offseason that they had to get creative. They had to go get Darren Waller to essentially be their number 1 receiver. So I think Darius Slayton's their best outside receiver. And in best ball, where you don't have to decide when to start a guy, that's the guy that I like drafting. I have him a lot as a wide receiver 6 and 7.
Yeah, it is a very murky situation there in that pass catching role or a pass catching room for the New York Giants. You got You got Darius Slayton, like you mentioned, Paris Campbell. They drafted Jalen Hyatt. There's someone I'm missing. Isaiah Hodgins. Isaiah Hodgins is there as well.
Hodgins, who said he played last year with
the
played in the playoffs with a broken ankle or something like
yeah,
that.
and that was
Wasn't
the
on the
game where he
injury
went
report.
off, right? Over 100 yards. I think 2 tutties he had there against Minnesota. So, I mean, I think he's got to break his ankle before every game if he's going to put up numbers like that. But so Eric Gray and Darius Slayton are the must drafts for the New York Giants. Guys, like Joe said, you're going to be getting at a great value, maybe even for free off the waivers or free agency, however your league handles it, once your drafting is done. So, Drew, give us the bust candidate for the New York G-Men.
Yeah, one of the reasons for this bust candidate is because of the guy Joe brought up is Darius Slayton. So the bust candidate that for me for this team is Paris Campbell. And the reality is I really don't have a problem where most of the fantasy relevant Giants players are going at the moment. Like I've got Daniel Jones ranked a few spots ahead of his ADP, and then I'm right in line with ADP on both Saquon and Darren Waller. So that basically leaves the mess of a wide receiver room to pick from. And you don't necessarily have to spend a high draft pick on Campbell. He's going as wide receiver 77 right now, but that's only 5 spots after Isaiah Hodgins, who I would prefer, and it's well ahead of the other options like Darius Slayton that he mentioned. I'm a Kentucky fan, so I love me some Wan'Dale Robinson. They're going after him. And then I haven't even mentioned Jamison Crowder. Apparently Sterling Shepard's getting healthy. Like if you want to believe that, if we can even believe that, but there's so many guys in this receiver room, a lot of which all do the same thing. And I don't want to be one of the ones taking one of the first guys coming off the board from this wide receiver room. And personally, I've just been burnt by Paris Campbell enough at this point that I'm just I'm done with it. I'm out. So my advice is if you want to take a shot on this receiver room, just wait it out, let somebody else take the first 1 or 2 options, and then grab a Darius Slayton or a Wan'Dale Robinson later on.
Yep. Agree with that. Paris Campbell, formerly of the Indianapolis Colts, a player that the fantasy community is either really in on or really out on. So it's kind of hard to get a reading of what his role is going to be on that offense and what he's going to put out fantasy wise. But like Joe said, Darius Slayton is probably, outside of maybe Darren Waller, the one pass catcher that you're going to want in that offense. Now, we had the must with Eric Gray and Darius Slayton. We had the bust with Paris Campbell. Rhett, give us the maybe for this New York Giants offense, brother.
And look, and when I say maybe, this is probably going to be a guy that a lot of people are going to rely on. When I'm saying maybe, I'm saying maybe he has the potential to be an upside high in QB1. And we're going to talk about Daniel Jones here because we all know the rushing upside. We all know the passing numbers haven't been there, the low touchdown totals in the past. So in Superflex, everybody wants Daniel Jones as their second quarterback. Like if you get Daniel Jones as your second quarterback, you are ready to roll. You are flying. However, in a one quarterback league where, you have one guy that you're going to start compared to these other guys, your Mahomes, your Josh Allen, your Jalen Hurts, whatever you want to call them, I'm calling Daniel Jones Tom Cruise this year because he's risky business in that sort of league. But let's go ahead and let's dig into it. I mean, we love that rushing upside. I personally, Joe alluded to it. Everybody's alluded to it. I love the addition of Darren Waller. I'm well documented on how high I am on him this year and what he can do. We all love Saquon Barkley. We all know he can catch passes. But even with a Darren Waller, even with a Saquon Barkley, that wide receiver room is still average on its best day. So none of these things, the addition of a Darren Waller, really equate to what that massive jump for Daniel Jones would need to be in order for him to be that high in quarterback one, which is why I'm going to call him a maybe play. If you look at his projections this year, according to Fantasy Pros, we're looking at a guy who is only slated for about 515 attempts, 3,475 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, about 640 rushing yards, and 5 touchdowns. So if you get that 700-yard upside, then, yeah, you're in business and you're going to do very well with Daniel Jones. But he's a guy that is also currently going in right on that edge at low-end quarterback 1, QB 12, high-end quarterback 2, QB 13. That's where he is in most rankings, and that's about where I have him too, somewhere around that quarterback 13 or 14 range. So knowing where he is to begin with and knowing his situation, it's hard to see him outperforming his projections to have that massive breakout year in order for him to become that high-end quarterback one. He would need to see a massive improvement in that passing output, probably 25 touchdowns for that to happen. And frankly, I don't think any of us really see it happening. I would love for it to, in order to make my Darren Waller prophecy come to life. But, we're not playing on my end. We're trying to see and give people good advice. So Daniel Jones, a solid play, going to be great in the super flex. In other formats, one quarterback, wait and see. If you can get him at value, always get a guy at value.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Daniel Jones, his rushing upside is probably what's the most sexiest part about him as a fantasy asset, especially as a QB2 if you're playing super flex on your super flex teams. If you compare him with a one of those top end quarterbacks, one of your top 10 quarterbacks, like I know both you guys are pretty high on Geno Smith. If you compare Geno Smith with Daniel Jones in your super flex, I mean, you could be rolling pretty stout there in your fantasy season. That's the NFC East preview. Great insight into the fantasy assets, some musts, some busts, and some maybes for the NFC East: Dallas Cowboys, Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Commanders, and New York Giants. Over under 2.5. We'll go around the frames here. Over under 2.5 NFC East teams that make the playoffs. Joe?
Under.
Drew?
Yep. Under. I agree.
Rhett?
I think it'd be 2.
I think it's going to be 2. I mean, it's hard to see 3 teams. I mean, you maybe see a Giants regression this year. They seem to punch above their weight a little bit last year. Outside of the Waller addition, not much that they've really added. So I think you have to go with Dallas and Philly being those playoff teams.
As far as who we're picking to win the division, is anybody picking anybody other than Philly, or are we Philly across the board?
Oh, that's silly to do anybody but Philly, in my opinion.
I agree, but I had to make sure. If we were going to get a hot take, I didn't want to leave without getting it.
The only other thing that's keeping that I want to say, I do say under, and I'm going to stick with that. But then you go to the NFC and try to find 5 other playoff teams, and you're like, all right, San Fran and Seattle look like playoff teams to me. Detroit and Minnesota, a lot hinges on Jordan Love and Green Bay. I don't think Chicago's there yet, but maybe. And I think we would all agree the NFC South is a dead nuts one team division.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's tough. Like, I mean, that would be the Giants or the Commanders' best chance, I would say, is the fact that it's really hard to find another like that third wild card. It's hard to find that team.
Yeah, they're playing in the right conference for sure.
Yeah,
that is for sure.
Yep. Now, we did have a early redraft target segment. It was time permitting. But Joe, before we let you go, do you want to just drop your early redraft target for the people watching and listening?
Yeah, for sure. As a matter of fact, let me go to my wallet here and find out who my my biggest exposure players are. Okay. My most drafted running back is Jahmyr Gibbs. My most drafted wide receiver, well, Darius Slayton's number 2 here. My most drafted wide receiver is John Mechie. Now, keep in mind, these are some lower end guys.
Sure.
So, okay. My most drafted wide receiver who's likely to get drafted in every home league is Elijah Moore.
I like that.
I also have it 21% AJ Brown, by the way. And my most drafted tight end is of no surprise to me whatsoever. It's Chig Okonkwo.
Mm-hmm. Does the DeAndre Hopkins addition
makes me happier?
Yeah, you're with me. I'm with that.
It makes look who's on that depth chart,
Yeah.
Like we're drafting, like I understand this is different because Philly's Philly, but we're drafting Dallas Goedert in the 7th round and they have 2 alpha wide receivers, like Tennessee's got a maybe kind of washed Hopkins and a maybe never was Treylon Burks. I know Chig was small sample too, but his efficiency metrics were out of bounds. Like he was outrageous last year.
Yeah, I agree. I love that take. I've been hearing a lot of we're going to fade Chig. We're going to fade Burks. It's a run.
Please fade. Please fade.
Yeah, let me
I'll
get
take.
the discount. I love it. I love it. Rhett, Drew, you want to just quickly give us your early redraft targets?
I got a couple running backs. I don't know if they're considered as running backs. Maybe they are, but two running backs that I'm above consensus on right now. J.K. Dobbins is running back 19. I've got him at running back 15. Cam Akers, running back 21. I've got him at running back 16. So those are two.
Yeah.
If I go receiver early, those are two running backs in those middle rounds that I've been targeting quite a bit at this point.
Dobbins is one who, with the contract, by the way, just somebody to keep in mind. He sat out of mini camps because of his contract, and he might be one. Like we don't think Saquon is holding out. We don't think Jacobs is holding out. I'm really interested to see what J.K. Dobbins does because he's already suffered the devastating injury. So that's an interesting one to watch, which is why I've been drafting Gus Edwards a lot. By the way.
I just grabbed Gus Edwards and Scott Fishbowl too. I love that call. And Gus Edwards is he's just a good running back. Like the dude's good at the game.
Zero catches last year though, literally.
Right. Yeah, don't expect any of that from him, but he's a good runner of the football.
Rhett.
All right, few guys. I kind of mentioned it briefly. Darren Waller has my tight end 4. Think he's in for a big year. If we keep on with this Tank Bigsby nonsense in Jacksonville, I'm going to scream. Let's buy the ATN dip. I just love the guy's game. And then we've talked about it in Houston. We don't know what they're going to be, but we have to love the idea of a guy with an athletic profile like Nico Collins stepping into that number 1 slot and maybe actually having a season that's not going to maybe win you leagues, but certainly give you some upside and end up somewhere in that 850 yard realm. So, for me, where he's going, which I think is still around wide receiver 60-ish. I mean, the Nico Collins thing it feels good. We're pro Nico though. So
we are a very pro Nico show.
Yes,
and then
sir.
shout out Mr. Scampers in the YouTube chat too. He said Cooper Kupp is the 101. So anywhere after that is a value. Mr. Scampers, I love you for that, man. Thank you.
Dig it. All right, Joe. We appreciate you joining us on Fourth and Frames. We know time is a valuable commodity, and you chose to spend some of it with us. So we really appreciate that. Let the people know what you got going on inside fantasy football, outside of fantasy football. Anything you want to promote, now's the time. The frame is yours.
I already mentioned the Fantasy Points data suite. Go to data.fantasypoints.com. It is free to access. You don't even need to sign up for it to access it through July 23rd. After that, you sign up and get a free 7-day trial whenever you do sign up, so you can determine if this tool is something that would interest you in the 2023 season, which will be updated every Tuesday of every week. So you will have your information up there. And I'm just recently wrapping up a podcast series of my own at Fantasy Points called the Franchise Focus Podcast Series. I sat down with a beat writer, analyst, podcaster for all 32 NFL teams. Actionable information. The longest one is under a half an hour of these podcasts. So I think you can get a lot of information right from the source for every NFL team, talking just all offense, all the time. Going to have an underrated sleeper for every team. So I really appreciate it if y'all check that out. I have 3 left to record. I think I have 6 left to post, 7 left to post. So it's been an undertaking that's been a big stress item in my life for the last month, but it's been really rewarding, and I hope everybody checks it out. And that's the Fantasy Points podcast. You can find that anywhere on where you listen to podcasts.
Yes, sir. Again, thank you for your time. That's it for us. Make sure you check out the IDP show, Shoot the Gap, on Friday with Nate Markham, Jorge Edwards, and Hollywood Titan. Next week, check out the Dynasty 365 show with Stacey Perez, Tyler Hale, and new addition Chris Burns. And of course, Mocking After Dark with the man behind the glass, on the ones and twos, Gator J and Kyle Ziegler. That's it for us. We'll see you next week. For Drew Scott, for Rhett Manuel, I'm Chris Battistel. Toodles.